Well, welcome to Moving Forward Together, a community conversation on the 2022 Rhode Island Civic Health Index. I'm Elizabeth Francis, and I'm the Executive Director of Rhode Island Humanities. I offer an acknowledgement of the land where we are located. Over millennia, the land now called Rhode Island has been home to many governments, communities, and peoples. Indigenous people from many nations, near and far, live, study, and work in Rhode Island today. We recognize Indigenous Rhode Islanders, including the Narragansett, Niantic, Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Pokanoket peoples, as traditional stewards and inhabitants of this territory, and we recognize the histories of colonial violence and dispossession against Indigenous communities in Rhode Island. We gratefully acknowledge the ongoing critical contributions of Indigenous people to the civic life of our state, region, and nation. We also recognize that the state of Rhode Island exists in part due to the forced labor of enslaved and indentured people of African descent and Indigenous descent. We acknowledge and honor the integral contributions of these Rhode Islanders to the state's institutions, infrastructure, culture, and economy, and we value their legacy in their descendants and in Rhode Island's civic life. Moving Forward Together is the culmination of an 18-month project to create and to engage with a report on Rhode Island's civic well-being and participation that's called a Civic Health Index. Rhode Island Humanities eagerly embraced this project because we passionately believe in the importance of public history, cultural education, civic education, cultural heritage, and community engagement for our society and for our democracy. This mission has been at the heart of Rhode Island Humanities since our beginning in 1973. And as we commemorate our 50th anniversary this year, promoting a more equitable and civically healthy Rhode Island is at the center of what we do and how we do it. The Civic Health Index was made possible by the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities and the NEH's A More Perfect Union initiative. Community engagement with the index was supported by the Rhode Island Foundation. This was a perfect pairing, and we are very grateful. We also had invaluable input and support from our partners at the National Conference on Citizenship and the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. The contributions of the community partners, some of whom have joined us today on our panel, truly made the index by and for all Rhode Islanders. Thank you. Before I introduce and turn things over to Neelam Sakaria, our facilitator for today's session, I want to note that any views, opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this discussion are solely the speaker's own and do not necessarily represent those of other speakers, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. And now I will introduce Neelam Sakaria. Neelam Sakaria currently works with the American Council on Renewable Energy and advances work focused on promoting economic justice as part of the energy transition. Prior to this, she held roles at the National Conference on Citizenship and Echoing Green, a global impact fund for emerging social entrepreneurs. With a wide range of experience building impact and equity initiatives, Neelam consults on projects with nonprofit and philanthropic partners as well. In 2021, she partnered with the Rhode Island Humanities team as a data consultant to develop the first Civic Health Index, focusing on the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data, including the expertise of the project's community partners. Neelam also co-authored the report with Julia Renaud, Associate Director of Grants and Strategic Initiatives at RI Humanities. And with that, I will turn things over to Neelam, and thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. I've seen so many faces and so many cameras on, and it's so exciting to see people in the room. I appreciate everyone introducing themselves in chat. Hello, I am zooming in from California this morning and so excited to be here. I'll start by providing a brief overview on the project for those of you not familiar, and maybe even those of you who have read the report. But before I engage with our wonderful panelists today, I have a few housekeeping items that I want you all to be aware of. We do have closed captioning available. Should you need it, you should just go to the bottom of your window and hit that more button, and you'll see an option for captions. We're recording this event. So if you would not like to be recorded, just please keep your video off and participate in the audio or in the chat portions of the call. We'll have two parts to today's discussion. So we'll have a discussion for this first hour where I'll talk a little bit about the project. I'll introduce our panelists shortly, and then we'll have breakout groups so that you can all be part of the conversation. But until then, totally welcome your questions, your comments in the chat. This is a conversation. We want you to be engaged, so please don't hesitate there. And then there'll be a few follow-up items after the event. You'll see an easy and quick survey about today's conversation. The link will be in the chat, so please give us your feedback at the end of this call. We would love to hear from you. But without further ado, let me talk a little bit about the Civic Health Index. In short, this report is an extremely cool project. It is the first ever data-driven assessment of the state's civic health. What does that mean? Civic health can be so many things, and with working through our community partners, we looked very closely at 5 themes in our report. We talked about community well-being, social connection, public participation, collective understanding, and finally, engagement with government. And along the challenges, for sure, we found so many opportunities to grow in these areas. And this conversation is hopefully one of many that helps Rhode Islanders collectively determine where to go next. I also know that there are many folks outside of the state here on this call today, and we hope that this serves as a model for what other communities might be thinking of as well. So, as I mentioned, we did this work in a fabulous partnership with so many individuals. Primarily, this is produced by the Rhode Island Council for Humanities, many of whose staff is on the call today. I thank them very much. They are a wonderful team. And in partnership with the National Conference on Citizenship, as well as the Rhode Island Department of State. Alongside myself as the data consultant, we had from Pawtucket to Providence to South Kingstown, 10 partners from the state's communities, various towns and communities, institutional partners that you can see listed there on the slide, as well as various academic advisors. I'm happy to say we have many of them joining us today as panelists, as well as audience members. Please say hello in the chat. I know I saw some names that seemed familiar. And then finally, this project was generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Rhode Island Foundation, and many other private donors. We thank them for their support. And of course, as you can tell already, we leveraged a diversity of opinions, perspectives, and data sources, from census current population data to locally collected data-driven efforts. We even launched our own survey to collect information from community members across the state. Our partners were critical in the survey design. They validated our assumptions. They provided feedback at every stage. And really, truly, this effort was an iterative and collaborative process, something that I very much appreciate about an effort this large. So what did we find? Well, for well-being, community well-being, that is, think the health, the nutrition of a community, which absolutely affect how we all show up in society. We saw factors like where you are in the state geographically and your race and racial identity intersect and pose barriers. For social connection, how we relate to people, we found one of many Rhode Island's strengths being that how well connected people are to their friends and family. In fact, the state tops the ranks for how well they are connected with friends and family. But when it comes to people unlike them, when it's perhaps with people with different backgrounds, race and age pose barriers. For public participation, we initially saw Rhode Island fall in the middle of the pack compared to other states when we looked at it very narrowly, when we looked at things just like voting and electoral engagement. But with the help of our community partners, when we expanded this definition, when we took a view that, for instance, showed us how people showed up through community groups or civic nonprofits, we saw how rich civic life could be. But ultimately, that insular social lives play a pattern in the state. For collective understanding, there are so many ways to understand this, from media to public heritage and education, to the monuments in our built environment. Rhode Islanders perceive and understand the state's history and reality in different ways, which were often related to race and education and age. Most essential on this theme was the frustration we heard around local media coverage and the relevance to people's daily lives. And finally, on engaging with government, we found many Rhode Islanders do well relative to the rest of the country. We are very engaged, but we also remember corruption and nepotism in the state's history when it comes to local and state offices. I hope that all recaps a bit around what we found. And as you can see now, if you didn't before, it outlines a lot of opportunities for improvement and questions. Without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful and very generous panelists to talk about this world of solutions that lies ahead. And so joining us today, we have Cathleen Carr, a community partner and executive director from newportFILM, Jeff Coates, a primary contributor, the research and evaluation director from the National Conference on Citizenship, Wanda Hopkins, a community partner, a member of the Native American Advisory Council, the Tamaqua Museum, and the University of Rhode Island, as well as a Narragansett tribal member and elder, and a master's in English candidate at the University of Rhode Island. We have Nicholas Longo, an academic advisor and professor in the Department of Global Studies and co-director of the Dialogue, Inclusion, and Democracy, DID Lab at Providence College. Doug Victor, a community partner and chair of the Elmwood and South Providence Crime Watch. Kyla Walters Clinton, a community partner, founder of Innovative Advising, and the director of Race, Equity, and Community Engagement for the Rhode Island Executive Office of Health and Human Services. And then finally, but certainly not least, Yinjiao Yi, academic advisor and professor of communication studies and director of graduate studies at the University of Rhode Island. Welcome all. Thank you for being here. So appreciate you. I'll get into it. We have a lot ahead of us, but I want to start off with this question around creating civic health indexes. Jeff, can you tell us just a little bit about why a project like this is so important and how this one specifically, the Rhode Island Civic Health Index, is unique?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me today. The Civic Health Index is a project from the National Conference on Citizenship, where I worked in COC. It started in 2008, and we have done over 90 reports or indexes in over 30 states. And like you all know, this is Rhode Island's first one, so we're very excited about that. These Civic Health Index reports are data for action. They're not data to collect and then sit in on a bookcase or in a library. It is actually data for action. When I work with partners across the country to do these reports, I highlight the importance. I always discuss the importance of, building a coalition of stakeholders that could help support and authoring the report, but also helping create those recommendations that are needed to move the needle across these 21 indicators that we look at. And what I find very fascinating about this specific Rhode Island report is how you all married a lot of other data to it. All our partners usually pull in one or two data sources, but you really pulled in quite a few data sources and a lot of data collection yourself, which is very unique. There's only 2 other states that I know of have actually collected other data besides yourself. And what the spin that you all have, and it being a Humanities Council project, is, you all are looking not only obviously at civic participation and civic involvement and political involvement, but how does culture affect these issues? And how do you actually build and utilize an environment in which engagement can thrive? You list all these wonderful partners and how people are participating in certain civic organizations. And now it's about, how do we utilize those and allow more engagement to thrive? How do we create a landscape in an environment where everyone is welcome? And I think this report really highlighted all that. And I'm very happy about this report. This is a wonderful report, and I reference quite a bit when I'm meeting with other partners. And this is the first time I've worked with the Humanities Council, and I absolutely loved every moment of it. And I hope to work with other ones as well. So.
Thanks, Jeff. Then that's wonderful to hear. We love to do well. And I think that you're absolutely right. We did take a lot of effort. I know the team at the council was very particular about how we wanted to go about this project, because diversity here only makes the perspectives in the report more representative of the Rhode Island that exists. Kyla, I want to ask you about addressing racial inequalities. Race as a factor came up in this report in so many different ways. What steps can we take to address the racial inequities in communities across Rhode Island?
Hi, everyone. There are so many steps that we want to take when we are thinking about addressing inequities in Rhode Island. We want to make sure that we hit multifaceted or use a multifaceted approach to make sure that we're affecting things upstream and downstream, to make sure that all of our community members are involved and participating, and that we hear their voice. So some of the areas that I know need immediate attention are education and awareness. They're key components to addressing racial equity in our communities. And it's so important to educate people about their history of racial injustice, implicit bias, and systemic racism. And I think one of the best ways to do that is in community. The Rhode Island libraries and places like the council have built learning circles. And that's what I felt like this was a learning circle for me as we conducted this index. It was wonderful to be around like-minded people, and they were excited about how do we make sure that we reach everybody. And they were thinking about different things, because equity work can be really difficult, especially when you're doing it alone. Community engagement is another one of those areas that we really need to target, because we can achieve a lot of opportunities for residents to engage in civic activities, such as town hall meetings, community forums, and other events. And we need to do that to help build trust and relationships, not only between the community and government, but between the residents and their leaders. I hear that all the time, but I really don't know these people that are representing me, and I really don't have the chance to really access them. So that's really key and important. Economic development we know is important, and we're seeing a lot of energy and investment being poured into small businesses, job training programs, and low-income communities. Health equity is essential, and really thinking about our social determinants of health and trying to address those in all different ways and make sure that there's alternatives to incarceration, and access to healthy foods, and opportunities for people to talk about some of those critical issues like policing and accountability. Additionally, diverse hiring is another place where we can make sure that if we can create those diverse and inclusive environments, and make sure that the workforce feels comfortable, then you've created this army of support that can really represent the community that they serve and bring in creative policies that promote equity and hiring. And so those are just a couple of the top ideas that come to mind when I think about doing this work.
Absolutely. And I think that what you've shared is in no way comprehensive, but gets at how inequities, specifically racially driven ones, just cut across so many facets of daily life. So very much appreciate your comments. And I want to remind folks that this is a conversation. We'll have breakout discussions around these individual topics at the later half of this event. So please take your notes. Please ask your questions in the chat. We have plenty of time for conversation. But Nick, I want to move on a related note to this idea of building dialogues. You know, we were able to find that race and age sometimes creates friction between different types of groups. There's a culture of insularity in the state. What tools or spaces are useful and accessible for starting dialogues with Rhode Islanders, people unlike yourself?
Great, thanks. Let me just start by saying to thank you all for being here today. I mean, as we think about the civic health of Rhode Island, the folks on this Zoom call are the facilitators of that civic health. So thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for being here. Thanks to the Rhode Island Council of Humanities for really helping to catalyze this conversation and building some of this data that can lead to action. When I think about the theme of this today and the role of dialogue in that, like moving forward together, for me also means addressing some of the problems and the challenges, what folks think about as wicked problems in our society and the wicked problems in Rhode Island. So if you think about things like climate change, of lack of affordable housing, just talked a bit about kind of underlying issues around racism, educational inequity, those aren't going to be solved with technical solutions. And a couple of years ago, I was in East Providence. I got to see Beverly Tatum speak, and it was on the 20th anniversary of her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And she said something that I think helps to frame this idea of the importance of dialogue. And she says, you can't solve a problem if you can't talk about it. So if we think about, the idea of building our civic health is about building social capital, but it's also about problem solving. And if we want to do that as a society, as a community, we need to learn to talk to each other. And so in Rhode Island, the good news is there's a lot of really exciting things happening. And when we think about like building dialogue, I think that probably fits into at least 4 different categories of what dialogue means. So the first is around, just like Kyla was just mentioning, learning circles. And if you think about kind of sharing stories, learning across differences, there's organizations like College Unbound or Dorcas International, which are constantly bringing people together, highlighting stories of what's important, the stories of Rhode Islanders. We saw that, I know Eric Sung is on here. He organized a Portales exhibit at Waterfire. And a part of that exhibit was highlighting people's experiences with COVID, but then also bringing people together for story circles so that people were able to be in conversation with each other. So there's this whole way of being in dialogue with each other, which involves sharing stories, but that's not the only way. There's also think about dialogue as a way to transform conflict and do truth and reconciliation and healing. So you think about the work of the Nonviolence Institute or the Reparations Commission in Providence, where it's bringing folks together to have really difficult conversations about often race or about conflict, and how dialogue can be a piece of coming to reconciliation and healing. And the third piece I think of when we think about how Rhode Island can engage in dialogue is around policy making and decision making. So if you think about participatory budgeting, the process that has really been pioneered in Central Falls, in Rhode Island, and now in Providence in the 02908, 02909 zip code, there's a major initiative around participatory budgeting around public health, where it's saying like decisions shouldn't be made by just experts or leaders and Smith Hill in the Capitol, but it should be about communities coming together, being in conversation and making decisions about resources, about public policy. So participatory budgeting is happening in Rhode Island. It's an exciting example of that. And then the last piece of this is, I think, around dialogue is that folks just don't want to have dialogue for conversation's sake. That's an important piece of it, but it also has to be conversations that lead to some kind of action, collaborative work around culture change. And so we see a lot of the artistic community doing work to catalyze that. You see Leadership Rhode Island, which every year brings a cohort of leaders in Rhode Island, of college students together, where they're in conversation and ultimately doing different kinds of action projects. So we see lots of examples in Providence where kind of dialogue leads to action. I'll just end this by saying what we really need to think about with this, and the Civic Health Index helps us think about this on a deeper level, is like, what is the social infrastructure that we have in Rhode Island, right? How are we building spaces? I know we have representatives from the Providence Public Library on here today. So think about spaces like libraries, community centers, art centers, our coffee shops, third spaces like the PC Smith Hill Annex, which was helped to catalyzed by Keith Morton, from Providence College. So these kinds of spaces are really important for us to invest in and cultivate, because the social infrastructure is kind of the foundation of the civic health, and there are the places that dialogue will take place.
Thanks so much, Nick. And I very much appreciate the way that you're encouraging us to think about infrastructure in this way, right? We need highways to get from point A to point B. We need highways to talk to each other too. So I think that that's a very powerful prompt to start thinking about these spaces, and thank you for naming them. I think that this next question, gives us even more space to think about that. When we think about how do we strengthen the civic spaces that exist, the report found so many people participate in these non-governmental institutions. So Kathleen, I wonder if you can talk about the ones that have been most impactful in your life. For example, parks or local heritage societies, or, even the corner store. What resources do you think allow these places to impact even more Rhode Islanders?
Sure. And thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone for joining today. This is such a bright and vital and dynamic conversation to have. When I think about spaces in my own life, just speaking personally, the first thing that pops to mind is there's a shop down here in South Kingstown that I gravitated to just because it just drew me in. And organically, it's turned into this intersection on the highway for a lot of different folks who have now made relationships and friendships through this one shop. And that's not something that you can plan, or like a town doesn't plan that. That's an organic third space, Nick, like what you were talking about. And, that has become like a place that's a touch point for me that I just like to go. And I chat with the owner, who is now a friend. And she is in turn supported by a local economy and a local chamber of commerce that invests in supporting small business owners. And so there's that undergirding infrastructure that helps these spaces to come about. I also think about the public green spaces, particularly during the pandemic, that became so important to all of us. And I think about having access to the public green spaces. And during the pandemic, I was a part of an organic meetup of folks that would come together and do art and learn Spanish together under an oak tree. And again, these are not things that no one planned, like it just happened organically. And community centers, public libraries are so important, and just places of worship, just the opportunities for those rooms, those critical rooms that community organizations can use to gather their folks together. So having access to these spaces is what we need, and we need to know they're there. We need to know that we have access to them, and we need to know how to access them, and we need transportation to get to them. And so public access to these, non-institutional spaces is so important. And I think making sure that there's very low barriers of entry, you can reserve it, there's no costs, there's not a lot of red tape, and it's promoted in a pro-social way of recognition that as community members and as a social species, we need access to these spaces. The coffee shop, we need opportunities to come together and be able to meet up together and have conversations and have meetups. There's even like a little thing. There's a bagel shop down here in South Kingstown where they have a community room, and it's a dedicated community room, and you don't have to pay for it. And it's just, you just reserve it and you can come and have a meeting with a community group here. So really encouraging and nudging behavior towards community groups, and ensuring that we have access to these spaces, that we can flyer for these spaces, that we don't keep everything online as well. I think that's so important. One of the things that we've become accustomed to, particularly that is concerning, is a lot of community meetups happen on Facebook, which is okay, but not everybody's on Facebook. And I know one of the issues that has occurred is a lot of community organizing has happened via Facebook. And if you're not on Facebook, then you don't have access to what's happening in the community and how to be a part of the conversation. So really making sure that we're not leaning too heavily into digital spaces, while it's an incredible tool and it's something we're utilizing right now, but making sure that we're not pigeonholing ourselves, because in terms of diversity and multi-generational perspectives, we all access spaces both digitally and physically in different ways. And so we just need to make sure that we're always making sure that we're creating a welcoming and accessible opportunity to access these spaces so that people can find these organic opportunities to come together.
Thanks, Kathleen. And I love how thoughtful you are about the hybridity of spaces, the diversity of spaces. And I totally agree, right? It's not an either or, it's about how can we say yes and to Facebook, to our parks, to our libraries, parks and libraries. This is a love letter to you. But I want to switch gears a bit, because I think we've talked a lot about education and making sure that people are aware. And I think that there's so many ways that the Civic Health Index really calls for ensuring that, these public spaces, our state's monuments, our historic sites, reflect the stories and perspectives of, of all of our Indigenous Rhode Islanders, of Rhode Islanders of color. And so, Wanda, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the importance and impact of more inclusive monuments and historic sites in the state?
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Oscar Laquasin. The importance of of including an Indigenous voice. If we think about Western thought and Indigenous thought, sometimes they just don't meet up because there's two different perspectives. I'll take one monument that we can discuss today that I think would be relevant, is the statue of Christopher Columbus and what he represents. If we think of a monument, we think of something that is purpose, it has a purpose. It's meant to be long lasting. It's meant to show importance. It's made out of either stone or some metal or something that brings some validity and weight to what it represents. And so when we look at monuments, we think of a power structure. And that's exactly what I see when I see a statue of Christopher Columbus. Do I think that they all should be torn down? No, I don't. I think that the dialogue around those statues should be inclusive. For instance, just on March 30th of this year, the Vatican repudiated the doctrine of discovery, which is the doctrine that gave Christopher Columbus the authority to come to this land and to marginalize the indigenous people here, not just marginalize, but murder. You know, we don't want to say that because we haven't been taught that. We've been taught, oh, Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, not from an indigenous perspective, right? So to be inclusive and to really bring honor to our communities, we do have to have inclusive voice, even if it's a little challenging, if it's different. I don't think destruction, like tearing things down, is ever a good idea. I think that we can reimagine spaces together. And one of those things is to maybe include that the Vatican did repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which was something that was used to take over to colonize lots of indigenous lands. In addition to that, we do have some wonderful sites that honor the Narragansett people, one of which is a Coronation Rock in Charlestown, Rhode Island. And a lot of people are not aware of that. So I think it's important too to maybe highlight some of the existing monuments that might be overgrown even now, right? Sometimes I go to these old monuments and they're just not cared for or they're forgotten. And so I think that reimagining some of these places and just highlighting them and coming together as community to show the importance of the history of Rhode Island pre-contact and to honor the people who were here first.
Yeah, thank you, Wanda. I think that you're touching on something that's really, really, I think been said in so many different ways here. We can't solve for it until we talk about it, right? I think, Nick, you shared that. And I think that what I'm hearing so much of is that we need to be able to have better conversations, better ways to move through conflict and disagreement and respect each other and hear each other's perspectives. And I think that that's if there was one message to take away, that's something that's been hitting home for me. I'm curious to hear from others. Please share your thoughts in the chat if anything's resonating for you. But on this topic of making sense of the world together, right? Media is such a powerful tool. Yinjiao, I want to ask you about investing in local media. We heard about the frustrations around local coverage in this report. And I'm curious on what you think it would take to achieve a greater investment in local independent media.
Sorry, I was muted. Sure. Thank you very much for having me today, and thank you everyone for joining here for this wonderful conversation. As I think about this topic and about greater investment in local media, first of all, I just have some thoughts about the importance of investment in local media, because local independent media are critical for the civic health of Rhode Island, because civic health is achieved when our communities are organized to identify and address public problems. So, and local media are charged to expose those local problems. And for example, they can keep an eye on city hall, police, and government officials, and then inform our people about the problems and help local people understand issues that they need to vote on. Once local people have adequate information about local problems, and only when that happens, solutions to those problems can be discussed and pursued among local communities. So I think the role of local media in civic health is very critical and pivotal. So with that said, there are a few things that we can do to have, to increase the investment in local media in terms of financial investment as well as human capital investment. Starting with local media themselves, I think in order to mobilize local media, local people to have a greater investment in local media, the local media themselves needed to inform people what they do and what their goals are and what their missions are. Because not many people will completely understand the local media's role in democracy and also in this community. So I think that is very critical to start with. And then once that is established, once everybody in the local communities understand what the local media can do for that democracy, can do for their communities, then they will be more encouraged to support their local media. So, in other words, informed communities may view their local media as a charitable course, just like environmental courses or social courses, or policy and political courses. So with that understanding, they can further support local media, either financially or contribute to local media themselves. So this is, I think this is a very healthy circle, because once local media help people understand what they do, local people can support them. So it is a very healthy circle. They feed each other, in other words. And then third, I think local media can collaborate with local community members afterwards, right? After everybody understand what they do. And then to improve civic health, because journalists and the community members are all in this together. It is not just the job of local media. It is not just the job of local people. So they are in this together to build a collaboration, to build a great community, to build a coherent community. And that is healthy for everyone and healthy for their community. So, and then also, as a result of this collaboration between community members and local media can engage multiple sources of funding to achieve financial stability and health of local media. So we are talking about support from local communities. That is a human capital investment. And now with that human capital investment, local media can take a look at their financial status. They can engage multiple sources of financial support in order to better their service to the community. So, for example, not just local community members, they can also engage civic leaders, local businesses, and local foundations. So, and even philanthropists and institutional foundations. So I think with those two kinds of investments in local media, financially and human capital wise, then local media can really thrive and then be a public service to the community. So that's what my thoughts about this topic.
Yeah, and thank you. I think that it's so interesting to think about the two aspects, right? We need financial, we need monetary support to do the work, right? To provide a public service, as you said, but also to invest in the talent, the people who drive the work, and really can do share the information, for help form opinions. I think that that's critical, as you said, to the civic health of the state, because we can only have the opinions to share, the perspectives to share, once we receive information on what's happening in the places that we live in. I think this next question very seamlessly goes into those topics. When we talk about engaging with government and increasing government transparency, right? Doug, I'm curious, what do you see is working well in Rhode Island when it comes to government transparency on the various levels, the state, the city, or neighborhood? And if you could also speak on to what needs improvement and how could that be made?
Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to everyone. I think that this today is giving proof that conversations can work. We are asked as panelists to give some information and a reminder to join the breakout groups for conversation and put your comments in the chat again. So yeah, it's government accountability and transparency. Wow. So about a decade and a half ago, I was asked by a previous mayor if I would begin and chair something called a crime watch in the south side of Providence. And I said to him, look, you've got to be kidding. And I said, I am so not interested in being part of an effort that's going to track the movement of specific people, especially people of color, and one of my views about crime is that if you're poor, you try to make it's a creative avenue to find economy. So we can debate all of this, and I want to just introduce that as part of the conversation here today. And I finally decided that I would do it and that we could do it in a different way. That if the people sitting around the table didn't necessarily look like me, and that if we can also begin to peel back the legacies under which we're all living, the legacies of race, maleness, power, gender, money, et cetera, that we can be part of that whole process, can be part of change agency in general, and can, as Kyla referred to, it can go up and it can go down, and it can go across. I think we have many different directions that we can have impact on, and have impact on naturally and organically. I think pretty much everyone has a viewpoint of what works in government and can see what's transparent and what's not. But I think part of our role in working with each other is to help each other to see more clearly, not only through our lens, our particular lens, but through the lenses of other people and how other people see, and to stay in conversation with people around that. It's so easy to disengage and to say, oh, no, that's not what I want to talk about. I'm done, I'm out of here. Well, Bell Hooks, who many of you may know, really advised us to have the difficult conversations and stay in them. And if you need a break, take a break, but recognize it's a break with whoever you're talking to, so that you know that you will come back together at some point, and you're not using it as an excuse to bail out of the conversation, because none of us need to bail out. We don't need to have any kind of structures, any kind of power structures that force people not to have their voice or to be silenced. So, as I said, we're all living under the legacies, and it was alluded to in the past, government corruption, the old boy network, nepotism, et cetera, et cetera. So, how do we sort of free ourselves from those legacies in government? who governs? So we elect people who are legally bound to represent our viewpoints. Yes, what does that mean? And how does that ultimately come to any kind of a sense of what really happens for the reasons why we elected people, and who they might be listening to and who they're not listening to? So, you know, engagement at many levels is important. It's a big job. Most of us have city councilors, we have state representatives, we have state senators, we have United States representatives, we have United States senators. That's a big task to build relationships with those people. But I think if we start somewhere and have conversations and get to know and have our elected officials get to know us and what is important for us to move this conversation along, I think that's critical. And I think not just having a conversation with them, but also asking them what action steps they will take to then bring those points forward, to ask them to commit to an action instead of just having a conversation. Conversations are important, but oftentimes conversations can be dead-ended without coming to some kind of a agreement that there will be an action and that we can begin to hold each other accountable for those kinds of things. So, so I guess, who do the current ways of doing things marginalize, and who do they silence? And what is government's role in turning that around? And what is our role as agents, as social agents, to help turn that around? And some people have called this an American experience. And we're in the middle of a big process here. And I think that we have been since the founding of the United States. However, now I believe this generation, those of us present, have a very unique opportunity to really shape this country in a way, and shape the government and shape the state of Rhode Island in a way that in previous generations we did not have the same solidarity and the same kind of camaraderie, if you will, across many types of differences that come together to form, an expression of collective voices. And I say expression of collective voices because there may not be just one collective voice, and that can be a trap. And so I guess I'd like to leave you with more questions and answers about that, in terms of, what is it that you connect with around all of what's been said today, and think about your own agency, and how your own agency can be an influencer, whether you're a visual artist, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a storyteller, whether you're a professor, whether you're an academic, whether you're somebody who is managing a community garden like I'm doing, and changing the landscape of that community garden from only having 3 people in the local neighborhood gardening there to having 30 people. So the garden then, as Cathleen mentioned, the garden has also become kind of a nexus for people to come together, not only to think about how to govern the garden, but also in terms of having all kinds of conversations that need to happen between people. And the faces in the garden look like the faces in the neighborhood. So at what level are we talking about government? We talk, governing happens at a lot of different levels. And at a community garden level, we're not elected officials. We're people who want to garden, and we come together and we find commonality through the foods that we're growing and the differences of the foods that we're growing. And we share and we have conversations, and then things happen as a result of that. Somebody knows somebody, here we go again, you know? And so the question is about engagement. And so, boy, you know, you posed a really big question to me that I don't have all the answers for, but I have a lot of questions about. And I think the questions are really, really critical. And I think one of the things that we've been doing at a very local level is engaging local media and to tell our story, because nobody else was willing to tell the story of the South Side of Providence that has been marginalized for so long. But the local media has. And so as part of my role, what I've developed is I send out a neighborhood newsletter that goes out every week, and it goes out to about 350 people, and it gives information about what's happening in the neighborhood. It gives information about how people can get engaged in the parks, in the garden, in local community life, in the betterment of the community, in city life, and at the state level also. So it's a call. It's a call. It's a call.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. No, and Doug, thank you. I think that you've touched on so many points. And I think I have to thank you, because I think that when we start mentioning government and engaging with government officials at any level, I think there's a level of pessimism. It feels hard. It feels bureaucratic. And your message around agency, and what I inherently think is an optimistic take, right, is like saying that we have power here. Holding accountability is power. Asking questions directly, engaging with officials at any point, there can be change made. And I think that that's a reminder around conversations are not necessarily always on equal footing, but how do we claim our power when we are talking to folks where we sense those disparities? And I appreciate you also sharing your newsletter. I think if you can drop the link in the chat, I think people want to know. But I know we're coming to a close here, and I want to keep the conversation going for the people who are staying on the line. We are going to be moving into breakout rooms, but just a few reminders on how we want you all to show up. I think many of you probably already reflect and demonstrate these. We all here may have different perspectives on some of these questions. Please listen actively, allow others to speak one at a time without interruption. Please sense the space you're taking up and allow others to speak if you already have. We want everyone to participate. I think this goes without saying, but please be respectful. We appreciate everyone's thoughts here. I think that the goal is not proving who's right and who's wrong. It's understanding where we're coming from. Use I statements. We think that helps with sharing experiences that are our own. Be conscientious about the words you're using. I think particularly when speaking from perhaps not your own experience. And just a note for all, what's said here stays here. We are recording this main room, but your conversations will not be recorded. So don't share any specific stories or conversations outside without direct permission from someone in the group. So with that, we will be turning to breakout groups. Like mentioned at the start of each of our prompts, we have 7 of them here: creating a civic health index, addressing racial inequities, building dialogue, strengthening civic spaces, improving education and commemoration, investing in local media, and increasing government transparency. When you see the dialogue box open, you're welcome to join one of those breakout groups. You just have to click the room. You scroll down and you'll see the names correspond to the ones on the slide. You just have to click join and you'll receive reminders around the timing. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome back, everyone. So good to see you all again. I'm so glad to see so many of you have stuck with us through these conversations, and hopefully nobody got cut off coming back into this main room. Just a reminder that we are now recording again. Your breakouts were not being recorded, but just want to let you know that the initial housekeeping still stands. Our time is coming to an end, and I just want to thank you all for your participation. If you could join me in giving a round of applause to our hosts, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities. Thank you to the team. I think it's been a wonderful afternoon. But we want to keep the momentum going. We want to keep action moving forward, and there are a number of ways that you all can stay engaged in this project. Do we have Elizabeth on the line? I would love for her to take us away on just a few actions to keep everybody engaged.
Yes, taking a page from what Doug said about not just taking things in, but also taking action. Here's some things that you can enjoy and do right now. So there are banners that are in both English and Spanish that are touring the state, and I encourage you to check those out where they land. Right now, they're at Teatro Ecas in Providence, and also at the Florence Gray Community Center in Newport. You can check our calendar for where they go from here. And also, I really encourage everyone to take the survey about the Civic Health Index and your own experiences in community, and also in relation to your experience of this event. That is linked in the chat, or will be linked in the chat. And when we follow up with you via email to thank you for being part of this conversation, the survey will be linked in that follow-up email. Please check out the index itself. It's been linked in the chat. You can also go to the Humanities Council website to find it. You can download it as a PDF, and you can also, if you would like a physical copy of it, we're actually ordering more copies from the National Conference on Citizenship. If you would like a physical copy, it is a very beautiful document. We are happy to send that to you. Just send an email. You can send it to me, Elizabeth at rihumanities.org, or respond to the email that you're going to get as a follow-up. So with that, those are the action steps for now. Really appreciate everyone being here and your full participation. And we could have gone on for a lot longer in our breakout, and which is inspiring, and just all of the knowledge and perspective and commitment in the room really, it really is making me feel elated. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the afternoon.